You close the door, you walk away, and you think it's over. But places remember. They remember you, and they wait.
I hadn't been back to Greywater in 22 years. Not since the summer my father died. It's the kind of place you leave behind without ceremony. A fishing town clinging to the edge of the Atlantic, salt-eaten wood, gulls screaming over empty docks. I thought I'd erased it from my life completely, until I got the letter. No return address, no signature, just 6 words, handwritten in black ink. The light is still for you. When I was a kid, the lighthouse was the tallest thing in Greywater. Old stone, chipped white paint, a single narrow spiral staircase to the lantern room. It hadn't been manned for decades, automated in the 60s. But people still told stories about the keeper who never left. It was visible from my bedroom window. I used to fall asleep watching that beam sweep across the bay, over the town, then vanish into the horizon. My father said it was like a heartbeat for the coast, slow, steady, keeping watch. The year he died, the light went out. The town said it was a mechanical failure. I knew better. It felt like the lighthouse was mourning too. When I pulled into Greywater now, the streets were mostly empty. A few shuttered shops, a bar still clinging on, a bait store with a faded open sign. And out past the breakwater, there it was, the lighthouse. Light sweeping across the gray water. Except it was sweeping faster than I remembered, like it was searching for something. The locals didn't want to talk. When I asked about the light at the diner, the waitress froze mid-pour. "That thing hasn't been lit in years," she said, setting down my coffee too hard. Not since before." Before what? She just walked away. That night, I checked into the only inn left in town. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up to my room lit bright white, a single flash through the window. It was the lighthouse beam. I got up and watched. It wasn't sweeping the bay anymore. It was locked, pointed straight at my window. It stayed there, unblinking, for over an hour. I couldn't take my eyes off it. And maybe that's why I noticed. The shadow, silhouetted against the lantern room glass. A man, standing perfectly still. Just watching. I didn't sleep again that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the weight of that beam pressing against the window, painting me in cold white light. By sunrise, it was gone. The lantern room dark, the glass empty. I told myself I had imagined the shadow. Maybe it was the old automation system glitching, stuck in place. But the longer I sat with that thought, the less it felt like a glitch, and more like a signal. The path to the lighthouse hadn't changed. Same cracked concrete causeway, same rusted railings bent from storms that came before I was born. The smell of salt was heavier here, metallic and stale, like old blood. The heavy door at the base stood wide open, no lock, no chain. Inside, the air was colder than outside. The stone walls sweated. My footsteps echoed too loud, like the tower was holding its breath. Halfway up the spiral staircase, I noticed the carvings. Shallow scratches in the mortar, layer after layer. Some were dates, others were names I didn't recognize. But one set was repeated, over and over, all the way up the stairs. J. Caro, my father's name. The lantern room was empty. No equipment, no keeper's chair, just glass windows staring in every direction. But on the floor, in the dust, were footprints. Only one set, bare feet. They led to the window facing town, the one that would have lined up perfectly with my old bedroom. And there, on the inside of the glass, was written in thick, greasy streaks, like from the palm of a hand, I never stopped watching. I stepped back, and that's when I saw it. The light wasn't coming from here. The lamp in the center was dead, rusted through, lens cracked, wiring gone. But outside the glass, hovering just beyond the balcony, was a white glare, suspended in midair, pulsing faintly like a lantern without a source. And within it, a shape. Tall, thin, shoulders hunched, exactly where the shadow had stood the night before. It moved toward the glass. Slow, deliberate. And as it came closer, my ears filled with a low, rhythmic thud, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. It stopped just inches from the window. I could see my reflection in its glow, and behind me, another reflection. My father, older than I remembered, eyes fixed on mine. His lips moved. I couldn't hear him, but I knew what he was saying, the same words from the letter. The light is still for you. The glow flared, blinding. When my vision cleared, the balcony was empty. The footprints were gone. But the light, it was moving again, sweeping slow across the bay, over the water, not searching anymore, just waiting. And when I turned to leave, I saw my name carved in the stairwell wall, fresh, right beneath my father's.
The old East Wing of St. Helena's Hospital was demolished in 2012. At least, that's what the town records said. It had been condemned years before that. Asbestos, black mold, structural instability. I remember seeing the chain link fences go up around it when I was a kid, the bright orange warning signs. Danger, unstable structure, no entry. The day of the demolition, my mother kept me home from school so we could watch from the hill. I remember the dust cloud rising into the sky, blocking the sun. I remember the sound, like the earth itself had coughed. And that was supposed to be the end of it. I never thought about the East Wing again until 2 weeks ago. I was driving past the hospital at night, my route home from visiting a friend, when I saw it. Light. Warm, golden, artificial light glowing from the upper windows of the East Wing. At first, I thought it was a reflection from the active building next door, but the light moved, flickered, and then, just for a moment, I saw a shadow cross one of the windows, human-shaped, slow-moving. The next day, I went back in daylight. The east wing wasn't there. Where I'd seen it lit up the night before was just an empty gravel lot, weeds pushing through cracks, a few rusted fence posts leaning in the wind. I stood there for a long time, looking at nothing. I asked around at the cafe across the street. The barista, a man in his 50s with tired eyes, froze when I mentioned the east wing. He said, "Don't go near it." I told him it wasn't even there anymore. He shook his head. That's not true after dark. When I pressed him, he just muttered, "Some buildings aren't built on land. They're built on moments, and those don't get demolished." That night, I parked across the street from the hospital. Engine off, headlights dark. At 11:46 p.m., the gravel lot shimmered. It wasn't like a building faded in. It was more like my eyes forgot it wasn't there. One blink, and the east wing was just back. The brickwork looked whole, windows unbroken, the paint, that ugly pale green, fresh. I saw movement inside. A nurse in a white uniform walked past a lit window, pushing a cart. Her hair was pinned up in a style decades out of date. My chest tightened because I knew that uniform. My grandmother wore it in a photograph we kept in the family album, the one taken the year before she died, the year she worked in the East Wing. I should have left. Instead, I got out of the car and crossed the street. The closer I got, the more real it felt. The air around the building was warmer, and the faint smell of antiseptic reached me before I touched the wall. I put my hand against the brick. It was solid. The front doors were propped open. The lobby smelled exactly like a hospital. Bleach, old coffee, faint traces of sickness that no amount of cleaning can erase. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. I heard the squeak of a gurney wheel somewhere down the hall. My shoes tapped against the linoleum as I walked. Everything was clean, too clean, like no one had touched anything in decades, yet it was spotless. I passed a directory sign. East Wing, Level 2, Long-Term Care, no visitors after 9 p.m. A nurse turned the corner ahead of me. She didn't look surprised to see me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and said, "You're late for your check-in." And before I could answer, she added, "Room 217. He's been waiting." I didn't know why I followed her directions. Maybe it was the way she said, "He's been waiting?" Not as an invitation, but as a fact, like it was already decided. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Every few steps, the lights overhead would hum louder, then fade, then hum again. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the floors were dry. Room numbers ticked upward: 209, 211, 213. When I reached 217, the door was already open. Inside was a small hospital room. Bed, nightstand, chair by the window. Someone was lying under the sheets, their face turned toward the wall. I took one step inside. "Close the door," the figure said. The voice was low, hoarse, but familiar in a way I couldn't place. I obeyed. When I came around to the other side of the bed, I froze. It was me. Older, gaunt, eyes sunk deep, skin pale and almost translucent. He smiled, a slow, weak curl of the mouth. "Took you long enough?" I didn't speak. "You left before we were done," he said, turning his gaze toward the window. "They've been keeping the room ready." He gestured toward the nightstand. There was a folder on it, thick, labeled in block letters, "Patient File J, Pending." I opened it. Inside were dozens of pages, hospital charts, notes, photographs, all of me at different ages, my handwriting in some margins, diagnoses I'd never heard of, dates that hadn't happened yet. And at the very back, a blank page, except for a single line written in red ink. Admit at 11:46 p.m. Discharge never. The man in the bed, my older self, coughed and pointed to the IV stand. The bag attached to it wasn't fluid. It was a dull, grayish light, swirling slowly like smoke trapped in glass. He whispered, "They'll want to start soon. When it runs out, they'll need another you." I backed toward the door. The nurse from before was standing in the hall, hands folded neatly in front of her. She said, "We can begin now," and stepped aside so someone behind her could pass. It wasn't another nurse. It was a man on a gurney, wheeled slowly toward me. His face was covered with a sheet, but I knew, without looking, that it was me. I turned and ran. The hallway didn't end. The numbers on the doors no longer made sense. 317, 405, B12. The overhead lights grew brighter the faster I moved until it felt like I was running through white noise. When I finally burst through the lobby doors, the cold night air hit me so hard I gasped. The lot was empty. No building behind me, just gravel and weeds. I didn't go back. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake to the faint hum of overhead lights, and for a few seconds, my bedroom smells like bleach and rain. And always, without fail, the clock reads 11:46 p.m.
I was 16 the last time I saw the cabin. It belonged to my uncle, though belonged is a generous word. It was just a one-room structure deep in the pine woods, built before zoning laws mattered. My uncle used it for hunting trips, but for me, it was a place to disappear. One summer, I spent almost every weekend there, writing in my journal, drinking instant coffee on the porch, falling asleep to the sound of the forest creaking. Then, one October afternoon, my uncle locked the place up for the season and never went back. He died 2 years later. The land was sold, and I assumed the cabin was gone. That's why 15 years later, it didn't make sense to see it on the hiking trail map. I was at the visitor's center for the state park, flipping through pamphlets when a tiny square marked Hunter's Rest caught my eye. The placement on the map was exact. The bend of the creek, the ridge line. It was my spot. The woman at the desk said it was an unmarked shelter that some hikers used. She didn't know how old it was. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The trail was longer than I remembered. The pines seemed taller, their trunks darker, as if they'd soaked up years of shade. The air smelled the same, though. Resin and wet soil, a scent that had lived in my memory all this time. I knew the turn before I saw it. A narrow path splitting off from the main trail, overgrown but still passable. And then through the trees, it appeared. Exactly as it had been. The same peeling green paint,
The same sagging roof line, even the porch step with the split plank I used to avoid. I climbed the 3 steps and put my hand on the door. It was unlocked. The hinges groaned just the way they used to. Inside, it was my cabin. Not just in structure, in contents. The plaid blanket on the cot, the chipped enamel mug on the table, the stack of notebooks in the corner, tied together with twine. I crossed the room in 2 steps, picked up the top notebook, and froze. The page was open to an entry, written in my 16-year-old handwriting. The date was tomorrow's. I flipped through the rest. Every page was filled. Hundreds of entries. Some were memories I recognized, written exactly as I remembered them, but others described events I hadn't lived, trips I hadn't taken, conversations I'd never had. And then the entries began to turn strange. Descriptions of people standing in the woods at night watching the cabin. Drawings of shapes pressed up against the windows. Lists of names I didn't know. The last entry was written in block letters, shaky and dark. I hear you coming back. The air felt heavier, like the whole room was waiting. I put the notebook down and turned toward the door and saw the mug on the table. Steam was rising from it. The steam curled lazily upward from the mug, vanishing into the dim air. I hadn't made coffee. There was no kettle on the stove, no water boiling, no smell of grounds. I stepped closer. The mug was my old enamel one, same chip on the rim from when I dropped it at 16. Inside was a dark liquid, perfectly still, reflecting my face. Only it wasn't my face exactly. The eyes looking back were older, sunken, as if I'd aged decades in seconds. I backed away, the floorboards creaking under my weight. That's when I heard the sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps outside, moving across the porch. Not the quick, casual crunch of a hiker passing by. These were heavy, measured, each one pausing before the next. The doorknob began to turn. I scanned the room for something to use as a weapon. My gaze landed on the stack of notebooks. The top one was open now. I hadn't touched it. On the page, in handwriting fresher than ink should be, was a sentence I could feel more than read. Don't let him in until you've switched. The doorknob stopped turning. Silence. I didn't know what switched meant, but then my eyes fell on the cot. The blanket was folded back. There was someone laying there. I thought at first it was a trick of the light, some shadow taking shape in the folds, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw skin. My skin. It was me. Younger. 16. Breathing shallowly, eyes closed. His eyelids fluttered open. He looked right at me. "You're late," he said, in my voice, but quieter, almost a whisper. "I've been keeping it warm." He sat up, moving with slow precision, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The footsteps outside started again, circling the cabin. The younger me glanced at the notebooks. "It's your turn to write now. Lie down before he knocks." I felt my body moving toward the cot without deciding to. The air felt heavier with each step. My vision narrowed until the only thing I could see was the worn fabric of the blanket. I sat. The younger me smiled, not warmly, but with relief, and walked toward the door. Before he opened it, he looked back at me. "When he leaves, you'll understand. Just keep the pages full." And then he was gone. The knock came next. 3 slow, deep thuds that rattled the walls. Something stepped inside. I couldn't see its face, only a shape too tall to fit comfortably in the doorway, moving toward the table. It picked up the mug and placed it on the nightstand beside me. Steam still curled from it. I looked down at the notebook in my lap. The page was blank. The pen was in my hand, and without thinking, I began to write. Not about what was happening now, about the summers here, the smell of pine, the sound of the creek, the day my uncle locked the cabin for the last time. The words came easily, like they'd been waiting. When I finally looked up, the door was closed. The thing was gone. But the steam from the mug hadn't faded, and the page in the notebook now had tomorrow's date.
Restrained, as if summing up. You could leave again. You could burn the map. But you'll still dream about the path back. And when you finally take it, they'll be ready.